Bienvenidos a Disrupt Everything, podcast series by Isra García. Reinvéntate a ti mismo y cambia lo que más te importa.
Hi everyone, this is Isra García, and what you are about to hear is an interview with a really and very special guest. His name is Dr. Daniel Brown, and he is one of the biggest and most renowned specialists on awareness, awakening, consciousness, and also born Tibetan meditation and the Bön tradition. He is definitely a genius, and this interview is really intimate. It's really powerful. I can say that it changed me. It changed how I perceive the world, and obviously due to the delicate health of Dan Brown, I had the pleasure to interview him, and we connected so deep. I felt that connection, and I'm glad to share that interview with you. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Ladies and gentlemen, the interview with Dr. Daniel Brown, The Awakening.
Disrupt everything. Explora los márgenes o muere intentándolo.
Hi everyone. This is another episode, and it's in English this time. And you know that every time we record an episode in English is because we have an international and a special guest. And I guess you guessed. This time we have an expert. We have an expert in Western psychology and synthesizing Eastern traditions. We have a person who is really involved on attachment. He's working on peak performance. He is Daniel Brown, PhD in Associate Clinical Professor in Psychology at Harvard Medical School. And he has served on the faculty for over 38 years. And this is Disrupt Everything podcast series, of course. This is a new podcast, a new episode about disruption, about the power of changing what really matters, about, creating this change that change people. This power for transcending, this power for getting your high performance, working the four human potential dimensions: physical, intellectual, spiritual, and emotional. And as I said, we have today with us Daniel Brown, Dr. Daniel Brown. Daniel, thank you for being in the podcast. Thank you for your time, and thank you for making this space for sharing your knowledge, wisdom, and career with us.
My pleasure. Hi to everyone. It's nice to be here.
Daniel is an author of 24 books and winner of the 99 Goodmeasure Award for the American Psychiatric Association and the American Academy Psychiatry in Law, and outstanding contribution for forensic psychiatry. As an expert legal witness, Dr. Brown has testified in over 200 child abuse cases and served as an expert witness for prosecutors and in the International War Crimes Tribunal, helping establishing a standard for evidence of victims of war atrocities. Dr. Brown co-founded the Attachment Project, which a project Dr. Brown will speak about, based on the foundation of his award-winning book, Attachment Disturbances in Adults, Treatment for Comprehensive Repair. The three pillars treatment method has also garnered praise across the scientific and medical community, which has the recipient of the 2018 ESSTD Peer Genetic Rating Award. Dr. Daniel Brown is one of the leading authorities on concentration training on mind focus, on peak performance, on performance excellence. And Dr. Daniel Brown is also really involved on the awakening, on the Bön tradition, and also the sacred teachings that the Tibet philosophy gathers. Dr. Brown is also a person who has been involved in really, really deep experimental projects, working in 16 and 70s with even LSD and microdosing. So I think is Dr. Daniel Brown is a disruptor, which is what we talk about in this podcast. People that is changing the game, people who is disrupting the status quo, and wow, what a story, what a life, Daniel, what a life. What would you? I've been thinking about the first.
Been boring.
Well, I think it's a really, really deep and intense life, and I've been thinking about how to start this conversation, how to start and then for me, the first question I would like to ask, as I was because I'm kind of fan of what have you done, like you trained and taught with the top Tibetan Bon and Buddhist lamas for more than 48 years, including lineage holders from some of the greatest schools of Buddhism, and you've been experimenting with a lot of things in your field, outside your field. So Dan, could you share with us your life milestones? That is to say, your eureka moments since you can recall. If you can get in back of the first years to now, what will be your life milestones? What would you say?
Well, as a clinician, as a psychologist, I've been in the field for 48 years, almost half a century. So at the medical school, at Harvard Medical School, I've been there almost 39 years now. And for the last 30 years, I've worked in continuing education. And what that means is that I read all the outcomes journals. There's 50 years of research on outcomes of psychotherapy. So I get paid to read all that and keep up with it. And I also read all the neuroscience journals and what happens to the brain. And it's a good job to have, because I get to keep up with how this field is unfolding and look at the main patterns and trends in the field and update the standard of care for almost all psychiatric conditions. And as a practitioner of Buddhist and Bön meditation for the last 48 years, I think the main theme is in both fields, as East and West for me, has been how do you bring out the best in people. So I've taught a course in performance excellence at Harvard Medical School for almost 30 years now. I have one version of it for primary care doctors and surgeons that I do once a year. It's a popular course at the medical school. I have another version that I teach for judges, and I have a third version that I do for executives of companies, CEOs of companies around the world. So the theme there is how do you bring out the best of people? So if they're in a position of leadership or some responsible role as a doctor, how do you get them to be at what they do? And in the meditation traditions, I'm interested in how you bring out the best of meditation, not just sitting quietly, but I'm interested in the final goals, like awakening and the refinement of awakening, so you have that all the time. And there's another goal where you eradicate all negative states of mind, and what flourishes is your experiences, positive states of mind. And that's an attainable goal. And then the final goal is enlightenment. So we're interested in what the best of human nature is. We have 2 years ago, sponsored by the Fetzer Foundation, a study on the neurocircuitry of awakened mind and how it's different from the ordinary mind. And we got really interesting results. Now we have a study on Sangye, the complete eradication of negative states and the flourishing of all the positive states of mind. I happen to think that has profound implications for mental health. So our running subjects this year on that and see if we can pin down the neurocircuitry of a completely purified, completely positive state of mind as a way of being in the world. So the consistent theme is human excellence and the best of what we can bring out of people, both East and West.
And then, and how, if you have to just wrap up and say how to bring the best out of people, what's been your most important learning so far, or how would you say that will be a good turning point for that mission, for that amazing mission you are following through?
Well, both meditation in the East and peak performance in the West starts with concentration training, putting yourself into a state where you train the mind so it's less distractible or not distractible at all and stays focused on whatever the object of concentration is at the moment. Concentration is the main ingredient in performance excellence. We the neurocircuitry of concentration. So there's an area of the brain called the anterior cingulate cortex, the ACC, and that is activated during competing attentional demands. So in Western psychology, there's a test called the Stroop Test. If I show you an index card and there's a big printed word on it and the word says green but the color of the text is red, you do a double take. Do you focus on the color? Do you focus on the text? And it requires effort to tune out the color and focus just on reading the text. So if we give people competing attentional tests like that, they activate the ACC, the anterior cingulate cortex. What's offline in children and adults who have attention deficit disorder? Drug, Ritalin, and Adderall selectively activate the ACC and put it back online. Concentration meditation, not mindfulness meditation, but concentration meditation, activate ACC. When somebody gets hypnotized and they go into a trance state and they focus just on the words of the hypnotist and tune everything else out, they activate the ACC. When an athlete goes into a peak performance state or is in the zone, they activate the ACC. There's a common pathway here. So the brain mind body techniques like concentration training or hypnotic induction, or an athlete knows how to that state, a heightened state of attentiveness and a real intense focus on the task at hand and tuning out all. So that's a necessary ingredient of peak performance, both East and West. Buddhist meditation training in Tibetan, it's called the Semnegu, with the 9 stages of staying, or there are 9 levels of concentration training. And we teach that to executives and judges and primary care docs and surgeons. Concentration training and translated into different developmental ages. So we have a book coming called Attention Development and Training in Children and Adolescents, where we've taken these standard concentration training practices, translated into 4 developmental ages, and we have methods to train 4 to 6 year olds, 6 to 8 year olds, to 12-year-olds and then adolescents and these methods and trying to integrate that into the school system, because nowadays with all the multimedia exposure, people don't learn to pay attention in any basic way anymore. And that's why performance is greatly interfered with. So we're trying to develop a curriculum here to retrain kids in the school system to pay attention more carefully, because that's the foundation of living a full life and a more present life.
Would you say that the attention is the currency of this new world? I mean, because it's what
That's a
everyone
good
wants
way of
to.
saying it.
Yeah, it's what everyone wants to extract from us, right?
Yeah, it's a good way of saying it.
And from you said something that really stuck on me, which is you said meditation, and I mean, is any comparison between the Eastern, let's say Eastern meditation and Western peak performance? Would you say that it's the same, looking from the two different perspectives and worlds, like peak performance and meditation?
It's same but different. It's the common factor in both training the mind in meditation. The starting point is concentration training. In performance and training, in that sense, there's a similarity. But the difference is that if you look at the, say, 40 years of research we have on performance excellence in the West, performance excellence, the field started with studying top athletes, and now it's applied to other areas like medicine and to courts and training executives in leadership training. But the focus on Western peak performance is on short duration states of excellence in doing something, like being in a sport and being on your game. So you're fully present. It's about short states of doing things the best you can. Whereas the focus on the East is not on short states of performance excellence, but on living life with vital engagement and having mastery over every aspect of your life. It's rather than something that you do. Doing versus being distinction is very important East and West. West, we like to run a meeting well. We like to be a top athlete or be on our golf game or tennis game. But in the East, the emphasis is on being a master at every aspect of your life, being fully present to it and extracting full engagement in what you're doing. That's a big difference. I think both are important.
And how to master every aspect of your life. I mean, I think it takes, commitment, self-discipline, like self-awareness. But how can we start to master every aspect of our lives? What have you discovered?
Well, I'll say a little bit about that. If you look at some of the models on performance excellence in the West, one of the simplest models to understand peak performance comes from Mike Csikszentmihalyi when he was at the University of Chicago in the 70s. And what Mike Csikszentmihalyi discovered was that there are two major ingredients to peak performance. One was a heightened state of attentiveness, beyond ordinary attentiveness, really a state of intense focus and resisting all distraction. And the second thing that contributed to peak performance was what he called a skill to challenge ratio. That if you have some new activity, like say I wanted to learn to play tennis for the first time, I would have a low level of skill, and I would have to arrange simple tasks. The skill level of the task should be simple. If I arrange a level of task difficulty that's way beyond my skill level, I'll get anxious and my performance will deteriorate. On the other, if I arrange a task that's below my skill level, I get bored. So the art of peak performance is a level of task difficulty that's slightly beyond where you are. So you're always learning to stay on that edge of learning.
It's same.
Calls that the skill to challenge ratio.
It's same as for flow, right? For flow state, it doesn't have to be super difficult, but attainable.
Same as for flow. Yeah, for flow states. Yes. So, but you have to find that you're challenging yourself at whatever level you're at, and if you do that in a state of heightened attentiveness, then you stay in the flow state. So heightened attentiveness plus self, just a little above your skill level, are the two main ingredients of being in a flow state, according to Mike Csikszentmihalyi. But if you look at other work, what we call mastery of living, and so that peak performance isn't a short duration state, but it's applied to everything you do. Then there's another factor involved in that, and it's the psychology of and development of what we call the virtues and character strengths. And Marty Seligman did a research on what they call virtues and character strengths. And every culture has a list of virtues and character strengths. In Buddhism, there are 8 factors of awakening. If you don't have these ingredients, you won't have the experience of awakening. So they potentiate growth. One of them is being able to keep track of the task at hand. Another one is, while you're keeping track of the task at hand, being able to stay concentrated on it. A third is metacognitive awareness, to be able to reflect on your state. And if it's not going in the right direction, you make the corrections on the spot by monitoring what you're doing with metacognitive awareness, as we call it. Another one is having the right level of activation or arousal, so you're not either bringing it to a too low arousal state, so you're getting low energy, or not too high that you get agitated. Or another one is to have a balanced state of mind, reactive to your experience. These are necessary ingredients. And in Jnana Buddhism, there are what I call this generosity of spirit, patience, diligence, are some examples. Trust in your own intelligence and your own resourcefulness, the opposite of doubt and fear. These are all necessary, and each culture has a laundry list of virtues. And if the more you train them, the more the as well become a way of being in the world where you have full mastery and engage everything carefully. There was a American player who was the #1 draft pick in the nation. He was drafted by a football team, and he played for them for 10 years. He did variable practice. Sometimes he was very fast and effective, and sometimes he wasn't very good. And he had a lot of off-field problems. He got arrested with illegal possession of weapons. He had some domestic violence. He never. And then when free agency came along in American football, they didn't pay him the money to stay, so he left and went to a team that wasn't very good. And with maybe 120 wide receivers in the field, the next 4 years he became one of the best players, even though he was 10 years older than most of the wide receivers. Became the best player in the league. And he also, instead of having off-field problems, he became a community leader. He worked with street gangs and violence and things with words rather than fighting all the time. So he made a big impact behind that story is there was a Tibetan Lama that I know well and used to teach with, standard concentration, running down the field to catch a ball. He wasn't at all distracted. He was in the right spot, a wide receiver. But this Tibetan Lama also trained him in what we call the factors of awakening, all the virtues in Buddhism, and he became a different person. That's why he was more sensitive to and compassionate to helping young children lead a better and less violent life. And even though he's retired from football, he still works with the street gangs and does that work on a regular basis. So by training the virtues of mind, temporary states of doing things excellently, to a way of life where everything you do, you have mastery over and lead a life that's deeply satisfying. In Western terms, we'd say the difference East and West is the state-trait distinction. The West emphasizes short traits of doing things well, and the East emphasizes the enduring trait of mastering everything about life. And the key difference is training them in the virtues. So this book that Marty Seligman and Chris Peterson wrote with a grant from the Templeton Foundation was on making virtues from different cultures. They looked at the Plato and Aristotle list of virtues. They looked at the virtues in the Confucian model for a great leader. They looked at virtues in Islam and Hinduism and Christianity, virtues in the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and Knights of the Round Table. They looked at all the list of virtues and they identified 26 core virtues and 4 subtypes, so that there are 24 signature virtues that are cross-culturally universally valid. And they published this as a counterpoint to our psychiatric manual of diagnostic psychiatric conditions called DSM. And they subtitled the book, it's called Character, Strengths, and Virtues. They subtitled the book The Manual of the Sanities, because it's about how you bring out their psychiatric conditions. So we know how to train people to live a good life.
And then would you say that it's super interesting what you're saying, because it's all about virtues. So we are experiencing a crisis, but it's not a crisis. It's not an economic or like it's not an economic crisis. It's not an economic downtown. It's more like a human values crisis. And also it all starts about from virtues and from principles and from values. And so you are saying that the most efficient way to start mastering yourself, mastering your mind, and starting to get into a performance excellence mode is through virtue and also through principles, right?
There's another aspect of this. To summarize what we've said so far, in Csikszentmihalyi's model, heightened attentiveness, a non-distracted, intensely focused state, and testing and challenging yourself with a little bit above what your skill level, that leads to short-term performance excellence, doing things extremely well. If you add to that formula the systematic training of a range, then everything about life becomes something that you have mastery over and you live fully. And there's a third aspect of this, and that is that flow, which is heightened attentiveness, finding that edge to challenge yourself. If you add another factor, which is meaningfulness, then life is a life of vital engagement. And this was research that was done by Robert Emmons in the University of California. And he has a very important book called The Psychology of Ultimate Concerns. And what he found that we all have, and if you study human motivation, we all have achievement motivation. We all want to do the best at what we're doing. We all have affiliation motivation, connect with people in the deepest ways and be satisfied that way. Some of us and others have a power motivation. We want to be able to be empowered to run things the way that we see fit. But of all those different motivations, which often cause internal conflict, the more overarching motivation that superseded all of those other motivations was what he called developing a central guiding principle and purpose in life. So people who have operate out of a larger vision of life and what matters in life. Usually it's a spiritual vision, but it can be philosophical or it can be humanitarian. But whatever that larger vision of what provides the greatest explanation of what's meaningful in life, if you develop that central guiding principle all the time, then that leads to two things. One is that life is deeply satisfying and deeply meaningful. And second, you have resilience in the face of stress, and you derive the greatest source of satisfaction out of what you're doing, and you vitally engage everything in your life. So that those who have that central guiding vision, life becomes sanctified for. So work is not work, it's a calling, and you do it with a single-minded purpose. Relationships are not relationships, they become friendships, intimate relationships. The talents that we have a duty to manifest them as gifts from us in the best way that we can. So that this leads to a third dimension, which is what Jeannie Nakamura calls a colleague of mine. She calls it vital engagement in everyday living. Everything you engage with is meaningful. Everything is a source of excitement and energy and vital engagement. When I was a graduate student at the University of Chicago, and my mentor at the time, who was Erica Fromm, took me to the Menninger Foundation, and we were going to teach a 3-day clinical hypnosis training course. And while I was there, she said to me, I want you to demonstrate some of the methods live, ask for a volunteer in the audience. So I did that, and I started to interview them, and then the door opens, and who walks in but Carl Menninger, who's about 6'6", towering figure in his entourage, and they sit right in front of me. And I looked at Erica and I said, "You set me up. You want me to demonstrate this in front of Dr. Carl, the great visionary in psychiatry in America in the 1940s." She sort of sheepishly smiled and said yes. So I did my teaching, and it went pretty well. And then we had lunch with Dr. Carl, and I really loved the man. I really connected with him. So I would take the old city of New Chicago to Topeka, get in at 6 in the morning. His driver would pick me up, and I'd spend the weekend with him, and we'd go for long walks. And he was the epitome of vital engagement. We talked about clinical Native Americans. Everything in his life excited him, and he became totally exhausted as somebody in their 20s because he lived a full life. Everything was deep deeply meaningful, and he was the epitome of vital engagement in his 80s. And I spent 10 years with him as my mentor before he died, early 90s. But I thought it was a precious opportunity to have this time with somebody who was such an exemplar of what we can see as vital. We can learn these methods. Anybody can live a life of full engagement. But in the positive psychology movement, and one of the studies is about what we call languishing. Languishing means you're sort of aimless in your life, the opposite of having a central guiding purpose. And 3/4 of people in the general population are languishing. They don't have that central guiding principle, but we can teach them that. And when we teach them that, their life is much more deeply meaningful. So when I teach performance excellence, we try and get the participants to central guiding principle so clearly that they can learn to operate out of it in their daily life, and that changes everything, because life is more enriched and satisfying, deeply satisfying, and they can live a vital engagement life.
And is it attainable, the central guiding principle? Is everyone, as you said, everyone can attain it, can learn it, right?
I think so. Although I did a 2-day peak performance course for most of the investors and visionaries in Silicon Valley a couple of years ago. It was the only time when I did an exercise for about 30 of the leaders in Silicon Valley where no one could do the central guiding life. And I was amazed because it nearly always works in these workshops when I do experiential exercises. And I told them, if you have the sense that you're influencing millions of people on computers, and that's all well and good, but you have no idea how you want to influence them and what you want to pass down to the future generations. It's simply not good enough. We have to pass down something positive. And several people wrote me back after the workshop and said that I was right, that they had made so much money and they didn't really think it through, and they weren't thinking about what we want to pass on to the next generation. And I actually went back and did a whole week's training with them, and I've been working with some of them since, because I think I can do them some good, because we need to shape a better vision of what we're passing on to the future. And it can't simply be that we make everything automatic, or that we live where cars run themselves and robots do everything for us. If we don't think that through very carefully, then we're going to evolve a world oligarchy in a way that small people don't work anymore in this other workforce. So there's lots of things to think through, and it's when people develop this spiritual vision, they get it right. So that's worth teaching people for. It's worth making sure they get it right.
And Dan, how did you step into the world of excellence, peak performance, and also awakening and attachment? Is any personal story attached to it?
Well, it's actually it was by accident. I taught a course for many years in Harvard Medical School. It was one of their flagship courses on treating psychological trauma. And I did that for 10 years, and we'd get about 1,000 people come, so it made good money for the medical school. And we bring in the top people every year in the trauma field. And one time they asked me to organize a course as the course organizer on trauma and spirituality. I said, well, that's an interesting topic. So I developed a topic, and we invited several plenary speakers who had some experience on that area. And we advertised the course. Then I got an angry call from the dean of the medical school 3 weeks before the course and said, we can't do this. Plenary speakers, you invited lost his license for sexual misconduct, and we can't have him be a plenary speaker. to
Wow.
the conference. And it was purely a serendipitous thing, an accident. And they said, so you're going to cover for excellence. So I had 1,000 people, and I just did the course, and it became enormously popular. And then the medical school said, this was so successful that you're going to teach it by yourself with other faculty. And you're going to do that every year instead of the trauma course. So we lost our trauma course over it because I was a victim of it. So I didn't dream on that, but that's what happened, honestly.
Wow. Yeah, thank you for the story. And then
I got a call from my boss at the medical school saying we've been asked to, if you do a similar course for Massachusetts. And so I talked to the head of the education committee for the judges, and he said, well, we want to do stress. But I said, if you want me to include something on stress reduction, let's not just teach what I'm teaching now in the medical school. Let's find out about what the stresses are for judges. So with the head of the education committee for the state bar and judges association, we send out a letter to all the judges and some with a questionnaire asking them what they felt was stressful, and they found all the answers to that and put it together on PowerPoint slides. And when I gave the workshop, I said to the judges what they summarized what they told me about what was most stressful in their job, and we organized experiential exercises that would address those things. The main thing that they said was that they felt very lonely and isolated in their work because they make major decisions that affect everybody's lives in major ways. And they can't talk about it with anybody. They're barred to talk about it, even with other judges. So they feel lonely in the major decisions they make in their life. So I recommended to the education committee that they put together small confidential groups where people can talk in the group about the stresses of their job and the cases they're working on. And they implemented that, and it was very successful. Then the other thing was that they had difficulty managing all the levels of the courtroom, from the difficult behavior of the attorneys to keeping the record straight so they don't get an appeal, so keeping the jury interested in all these things. And they had to work on many levels there at once. And we introduced a small section on concentration training for that. And then they told me that the main thing was that they had to work so much they couldn't think about the purpose of the work anymore, and they lost sight with why they got involved in doing this as a judge in the first place. So I gave the exercise on the central guiding principle, and that's what they liked the best. That worked for them. They had a humanitarian, almost civic view of and why that was important. And when they could renew that perspective and hold that perspective in the courtroom, they were more resilient in the face of this. It worked. They were more deeply satisfied and derived greater meaning out of it. They weren't bored anymore.
And then
to train them. And then they decided they wanted to come back and do a full day of training and concentration. So I did a whole day in concentration at the time that they took off their own time, and they did a full day of training on that. Then I did the district court judges and the civic family court judges, and it was very successful. I like working with the judges.
And then you have a profound life full of experiments. You even started an experiment with the LSD in the 60s and 70s. I'm really, really interested in that as I just finished microdosing, and I'm also investing in the first legal and supervised psilocybin retreat in Amsterdam. So, can you elaborate on this? I mean, as well as as well as on on findings. So, in your in your experiment with LSD
I
in the 70s.
worked in 1970 and 1971 at Maryland Psychiatric Research Center. I went down there originally to work with an MD PhD who was the director. I was a student at the time between college and graduate school. And I was interested in that research because I was working at a walk-in freestanding drug clinic, and I'm a product of this. So one of the things that I did was I ran all the medical tents at all the big rock festivals in the 60s and 70s, except for Woodstock, although I went to Woodstock. And I did a lot of work with helping run the medical tents at these big rock festivals and set it up. So I wanted to see what they were doing in a more formal research training program with high doses of LSD, which is 400 micrograms Sandoz LSD, which is about 1,000 times more powerful than what the kids were getting on the street.
400.
But when I went down there, it's off the charts. And then when I went down there, the month before Wally Punky had died, he was staying at a summer cottage in Maine. Never came back. He went by himself, which is one thing you don't do. So I showed up there and losing my mentor. Taking over the program was Stan Groff, and I worked with him 2 summers, and we were doing about four trips a day, high dose trips with terminal cancer patients as a team, guiding them through a 16-hour session. And they would open up a whole world of the mind, because psychedelic means mind manifesting the full potential of the mind. And often people who were terrified of dying because they were in early stages of dying from cancer, all of them had end stage cancer. They would open up a larger vision of see that dying was just a phase, and they would be well prepared to die. They all died, but we felt that we made a difference. And 2 years later, they shut down all the research in the country and around the world, and it went out of phase for about until now. Now it's in the last 3 or 4 years, it's gotten very popular again. We have some understanding of the neuroscience of this today that we didn't have in 1970 and 71. And it's very similar to mindfulness. As I said, concentration training, focusing on one thing and tuning everything else out, activates the ACC, the anterior cingulate cortex. But when people do mindfulness, they deactivate the PCC, the posterior cingulate cortex, the other side of the cingulate gyrus. And the PCC gets rising and judging experience is good or bad, or like or don't like. So what happens when train non-judgmental mindfulness meditation? They take the PCC and put it offline, the posterior cingulate cortex, so they get a state of completely present, and everything is equally as interesting. And there are 2 studies that also show, there are 5 studies showing that mindfulness deactivates the PCC. There are 2 studies that show that psilocybin deactivates the PCC in a similar way, although the drug does it rather than the mindfulness meditation technique. So when people are on psilocybin, they are fully present moment by moment to what's going on in their immediate unfolding experience, and they do it, and everything's equally interesting, and they're fascinated with everything, and they don't judge anything. And life is more meaningful when we stop all this incessant judging it one way or another and categorizing it. They just take it in with full awareness, and they don't think about it or categorize it. They experience it I am is coming back, certainly coming back strong in Silicon Valley. People use it now, and for generating creativity, microdosing is a small amount that you take on a regular basis, maybe daily, like 50 milligrams as opposed to milligrams. So it's not that powerful. We were doing 400 micrograms of Sandoz LSD, which is very pleasant. Sometimes do it in the context of a sensory isolation chamber, and it's a much bigger womp. But what I've learned, which I've been steeped in for the last 48 years, is that in the meditation tradition, one of the things that interferes with awakening is what we call attachment to states. And there are three special states that when you get advanced in your meditations and you stop thinking, one of three things, world of visual objects is not solid anymore. It's all like light and density and color and light and space. So you live in a world where everything is light and light rays. And you can get attached to the display of luminosity. Another is that you can get attached to the extreme pleasure of thrills and raptures and bliss. We call that getting attached to bliss. Or you can finally stop completely thinking and there's a profound stillness and you live in a field of awareness where there's absent of all thought, even the subtlest fleeting thought. And you like the stillness and it's a relief from thinking and mind wandering, and you get attached to wanting to create that more and more. And the more you want to create bliss, the more it causes some destabilization of mind and attachment. That's well documented in the meditation tradition and how you work beyond them. But we've had a number of young people who've taken our week-long meditation course where we emphasize the experience of awakening. And they take the course and they get excited about it and they don't continue it. Even if they get a taste of awakening, they don't continue it because they're on the ayahuasca circuit or the psilocybin or the microdosing circuit, and they keep looking for more and more weird and wonderful states, and they can't see it as the dance of lively awakening. And they look for things that they get attached to. And as soon as they do that, they're off track. And they get further important than what you get out of microdosing. For example, if the result of deep concentration is whatever the mind intends, it does just that immediately. Is our everyday experiences, we operate out of thinking, and that's our basis of operation. That's where we're coming from. I'm operating out of thought. Or another problem in my daily life is I'm operating out of sense of self. I operate out of damnness, self-represent. And in the meditation traditions, you learn to go beyond the things you get caught up in. There's a model for the practice that comes from a little mantra from the Heart Sutra. And in Sanskrit, it goes like this: Gate, gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhisvaha. Gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhisvaha. Here's what it means literally: gone, gone, gone way beyond, gone way, way beyond. Ooh, what a realization. There's your entire path. And what it means is that we, in our everyday experience, we get caught up in thought. We over-identify with thought. But if I do deep concentration meditation, thought activity winds down and eventually most fleeting thought stops. So I have long periods of stillness, absence of all thought. And then I can see that we're operating out is not out of thought. I'm operating out of that larger field of awareness. I'm operating out of what's called the intention of awareness. Thought is slow. Thought occurs in half a second to 3 seconds, 500 milliseconds to 3,000 milliseconds. The intention of awareness is lightning speed. It operates out of less than 10 milliseconds. And whatever the mind intends, it goes just to that and does just to that and stays on what you want it to stay on for as long as you do it. And with no extraneous thought activity interfering with that. That's a good state to be in. That's the state I try and do when I teach. That's the state I try and be in when I'm an expert witness on this abuse or trauma case or in the war crimes tribunal. It's a state that I try and be in when I write. So I'm operating out of the of awareness, out of thought. But then I will find that the habit of my mind, the ordinary mind, is such that I learn to operate out of sense of self. I operate out of damnness. But if I do what's called emptiness of self meditation, I don't get rid of damnness. I just shift my basis of operation. So I'm not operating out of Dan anymore. I'm operating out of that larger field of awareness, of which Dan is just a part of the field. So I shift perspectives, or I shift what we call our basis of operation to operating out of that larger field, not operating out of Dan. But then I find that that larger field that I'm operating out of comes and goes in conventional time. And in my everyday, I operate out of the coming and going of time. But then there's a certain meditation I can do that I can learn to identify that even come and go in conventional time, that the field itself is timeless, and I can shift my basis of operation to that larger field of timeless awareness. And it's completely timeless and changeless. And that's convenient because once I lock into that field of awareness, it doesn't go away, because going away presumes the convention of time, that goes away in time. So it's always present to me. And since time and space are related, I can come to set up a certain meditation view where I can see that that space is not only timeless and changeless, but it's also boundless and limitless. And I can set up a view of what we call ocean, like changeless, boundless awareness. It's so vast that everything is included within it. And I had a meditation called Ocean and Waves practice that Miller Raper developed. And when I do ocean and waves practice, all the content of the universe is contained within that limitless, boundless, timeless awareness. It's all interconnected. And everything I think, every movement of my mind, every action that I take influences everybody else in that field. So it changes my ethics because I'm operating in a world where everything affects everything else. It's like a continuous field effect. That's a good state to open up. And that vast, limitless, timeless awareness is the root of creativity. We once gave Rorschach ink blots to people before they meditated and when they got deeply concentrated and when they had changed ocean and waves practice. And what we found was that before they look at the ink blots and they come up with content like, this is a bat, this is a butterfly, this is a person. And when they got deeply concentrated, stopped thinking, they looked at this and said, this is ink, this is the shape of the ink, the shading of the ink, or the color of the ink. They didn't make it into anything. And when we got people at ocean and waves practice, they gave us, we had to stop the Rorschach hours. It was infinite creativity. And we gave it to them the next day, they gave us all completely different responses again. So when you open up that practice, what we call spontaneous mind, where everything is contained with all at once, it's the source of infinite creativity. It's a better state for creativity for leaders and executives in companies is that than LSD microdosing is. It's far superior to that. So it's not hard to teach these things. So they have an infinite source of creativity. And then the final, when you move beyond ordinary time, and that's why it's linguistically marked paragate, gone way beyond the convention of time to ocean-like, changeless, boundless awareness. And there's one cloud left. We tend to localize consciousness, and that consciousness is dualistic. So I think that within that limitless domain awareness, I'm operating my consciousness, I locate in that, and I'm looking at something out there in the same field that seems further away in the same field. That's dualistic thinking. And with certain meditations, I can dissolve the dualism and I can dissolve that locality. And then I'm operating out of being that unbounded wholeness. And that awareness is absolutely lucid and bright and crystal clear. And I see everything clearly, and that awareness is loving and compassionate. Then I have awakened mind. And when people shift out of ordinary awareness to awakened awareness. That is linguistically marked in the Heart Sutra. It's called Parasamgata, the localization of consciousness to brilliantly lucid, loving, awakened awareness. Bodhisattva, realization. You have to recognize this shift. You have to see that your awareness is not an ordinary awareness anymore. So we have many students who can do that, and that we, FETSA Foundation, sponsored some research that I did in conjunction with Judd Brewer, who used to run the neurocircuitry, neuroscience lab at UMass Medical School. He's since gone to Brown University. And we gave him, I said to the FETSA Foundation and to Judd, I said, look, if I can deliver you 30 subjects who have a taste of awakening, not all the time, but some of the time, then can you scan them and see the differences between ordinary mind and awakened mind? So that's what we set up, and I gave them 30 subjects. One subject, the equipment didn't work that day for, but for all 29 subjects, when they got to ocean and waves in that meditation condition, they had activated the ACC, the anterior cingulate cortex. But the unusual finding is they had a frequency of bandwidth of gamma activity. When we're awake, we're in beta activity, which is about maybe 15 to 20 hertz amplitude of, and when we're more in a daydream state, it's about 12 to 8. And when we get in a reverie state, transition into sleep, it's slower wave. And when we get into deep sleep, it's a delta wave activity, which is 4 hertz. But this is the opposite direction. When we had the 29 all in ocean and waves practice, we're experiencing the simultaneous mind with everything interconnected within it. We had gamma activity, which is 60 to 60 hertz maximum output. So we interpret that as that they were holding that perspective in an absolutely stable way. And that was interesting. But when they shifted from ordinary mind to awakened mind, we found that they activated an area of the parietal system that conventionally we associate with shifting local to much more global awareness. So they had a huge, absolutely limitless, brilliantly lucid awakened awareness, and opening up that limitlessness of this awareness. That's where they learned to operate out of. And that we found that all 29 subjects who had that shift to awakening, it was also gamma activities. They were operating with maximum output, 60 to 65 hertz output in that region of interest. So not the whole brain, certain regions of the brain wake up under certain meditation conditions. And there's a specific marker for awakened mind, which is gamma activity, which we interpret as all the cells firing synchronistically in that area of the brain that shifts our perspective to a much wider, deeper perspective in life. And we learn to hold that perspective all of the time and operate out of that. There's our spiritual vision that I was talking about earlier. So getting that experience of awakening is important. And that things like, from my perspective on that, things like microdosing with LSD are going to lead to attachment to states. So it's going to make it much harder. They're actually precluding awakening. They're not going to see the true experience of an awakened mind, because these things are going to interfere with it. That's, from my point of view, very sad.
So Dan, if I understood well, using psychedelics, using psilocybin, using ayahuasca, MO5-DMT, instead of
I've done all of that, yes.
Instead of giving us awareness, in a total awareness, attentive awareness, will create more attachment to this.
It creates more attachment to states and experiences. We more and more weird and wonderful experiences. And we don't get the larger picture, which is shifting to this total global awakened awareness and operating out of it. And if you do that, it will move your heart. It's usually accompanied by spontaneous compassion, gratitude, and devotion. So you start serving the world differently. So that's a more important.
Yeah, it's a more holistic.
Open up.
It's a more holistic perspective, right? More like more
It's
integral and more human. Yeah.
In the Western mission, that if you look at Piaget's work on theories of intelligence, it stops operational thinking in adolescence. If we think that human intelligence stops with adolescence, we're in trouble as a species. But some people have looked at post-formal stages of intelligence, and there are 6 post-formal stages of intelligence, and some of them go beyond thinking to pure awareness. And one of them includes this shift to stable awakened awareness, and we learn to operate out of that intention of awareness rather than operating out of thought mode, because thought is far more limited. We can teach people how to do this. We teach it better to operate out of an awakened state of mind and to stabilize it. And if you operate out of that awakened awareness, the next task is to, on the pillow, to set up that view so more frequently, for larger duration, longer duration, and more immediately. After a while, it becomes a learned pathway, so that as soon as you put the intention to setting it up, you shift from ordinary mind to awakened mind, and then you start taking it off the pillow. With my teacher, one time I went on a retreat, and he made me sit in front of his office, and he had a steady stream of people, and my task was to converse with them while I maintained an awakened sitting, while I maintained an awakened mind. And after a while, you have it all the time. It never goes away. And no matter what you get, life is like a thin veil. You just put the intention to look, and it's always right here. It never goes away. And if you hold that view of that limitless expanse and let everything arise within it as the liveliness of awakened awareness, and let everything run its own course without mental engagement, that's an important part of this practice that in Dzogchen are great completion practices in Tibetan Buddhism and Bön. What we say is that mental engagement is what causes karmic memory traces to develop. And we make millions of karmic memory traces. We attend to something and engage it in our mind, we make a new karmic memory trace. And we have a reservoir of millions of karmic memory traces that are ripening all the time, and all the extraneous thoughts that seem to come from nowhere in our mind, both when we're waking and when we're comes from the ripening of karmic memory traces. If you set up this view of the expanse, and simultaneously with everything arising in the expanse as the liveliness of awakened awareness, and you don't engage anything and let it run its own course, then what happens is that everything disappears like writing on water, and it forces the mind into rapidly releasing all the karmic memory traces. It takes about 6 or 7 years to do this. If you do other advanced practices like inner fire, time down to about 2 years. But the outgrowth of this is that you exhaust karmic memory traces. You move beyond karmic influence. You exhaust all negative states of mind, and because the negative states mask the positive states, you get a flourishing of all positive states. There are 80 states, depending on how you count them. Positive states to a Buddha mind. This is called Sangye in Tibetan. Complete eradication of negative states and the flourishing of all positive states. I happen to think this has profound implications for mental health. We now have about 60 students who can do this, and we'll start running subjects through research with Judd Brewer again. And we'll know in another year what the neurocircuitry marker is for Sangye, and I think the medial orbital cortex. And the medial orbifrontal cortex is the center of the brain that assigns emotional salience to things. It's the center of the brain that has all the positive emotions in it, and it's the center of the brain for pro-social behavior and connecting to others. So what we think we're going to get is gamma activity in the medial frontal orbital cortex, so that you can evolve as a human being to the point that you have no negative states in your experience. And if they rise, they immediately disappear into the experience.
How can evolve to this state of having no negativity at all?
By doing the meditations, and you can operate out of 85 positive states all of the time, and that means you're going to be more deeply connected to people and to the meaning of life, and be compassionate. You operate out of your heart. You're deeply connected with people. You live out of a world of This is what we need as a model for leaders. In the East, the model for leaders was the enlightened king. I think we can bring that back. We can teach people, leaders, how to develop these states, and they're going to be positive leaders who are psychologically mature and developed, and they can operate out of this state and do good things for the world and pass them on, have a ripple effect down the generations. This is possible to do. That's why I'm doing this work, because it represents a vision of what we need for the future if we're going to survive as a species.
It's amazing, Dan. It's amazing the work you're doing for creating this model. I think approaching that, teachings and learning from the enlightenment states to leaders, to influencers, to people that has the power to change the world, it has a ripple effect, and it gets spread through the masses. Would you say that the meditation is
That's my hope.
Yeah, no, I mean, and you are doing it. You are doing it, and you are nailing it. So you think meditation is the main technique? I mean, and how you approach meditation, how you
the technique is training the mind. Whether we do that east or west, the main technique is training the mind. So in the West, up from 30 years of research on performance excellence. In the East, the training of the mind is meditation, and different types of meditation depending on what level of mind we're training. So the common factor here is training the mind and having a disciplined, trained mind. The ordinary minds are very smart and they're very strong, but they get spooked easily. So on a game preserve, if you scare an elephant, he'll stampede and cause lots of damage. So our ordinary mind is like a wild elephant. So we have to train the mind, and we can train the mind by tying the elephant mind up to a stake with a chain, and every time the elephant wanders off, it gets pulled back by the chain. And if it gets pulled back many times, it figures out it's not going to go anywhere, so it stays put. That's a metaphor for concentration meditation. Wherever the mind chases off to, or we say Jesu Drunga in Tibetan, chasing after motors, chasing after one thing or another thought, an extraneous thought, a sound, something in the physical environment that we look at. It's always in chasing after mode. And every time what we train the mind to do is when it starts to go elsewhere, we train back to the meditation object, like directing a steering wheel in a car. And if I do that thousands of times, the steering wheel stays on the road, or the mind stays on the intended concentration object, and we don't go anywhere else. So that's the metaphor for training the mind with concentration. With another style of meditation is pure awareness meditations. So in that case, I don't tie up the elephant. I just watch the elephant and never take my eyes off the elephant. And no matter where it goes, I keep my eyes on the elephant. That's a metaphor for awareness meditations, where you're continuously training the continuity of awareness rather than having gaps in your awareness, where we have moments where we dissociate. I'm missed out and I'm not aware of what I experience. We need to train concentration primarily.
Is this related
to mindfulness?
Is this related to stillness?
Stillness is the absence of thought.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot left over when you stop thinking. What's left over is operating out of the lightning speed and intention of awareness. And so whatever the mind intends, it goes just to that with no interference and does it immediately and effectively. That's the state of mind that I try and get in when I'm testifying as an expert witness on the stands or I'm writing a book.
Wow.
When I did this concentration training for the Superior Court judges, the second time I worked with them, I talked about when they got more concentrated, they would have periods where there was no thought going on. And one of the judges raised his hand nervously and said, "We're so busy that we don't have a chance to write up our findings. I write them up when I'm brushing my teeth and shaving in the morning. So if I stop thinking, how's that going to help me?" I said, "Wait until the end of the day." And when they got deeply concentrated, I said, "Okay, now bring to mind a set of findings you're trying to write up on a current case and see what it's like to have operate out of the intention of awareness rather than operating out of thought, and direct your thoughts with the intention of awareness, with no extraneous interfering, and nothing gets in the way, and you'll see that your mind is crystal clear and you'll write much more clearly. And they were stunned. It wasn't hard to do. It's just getting the right training for this stuff.
And that you have
That's
an
how I got
interest.
24 books written.
I mean, there's is you've written all the 24 books on following this approach, right? I mean, the way you
Half of them are Tibetan translations. I've worked with the Tibetans for 48 years. I've taught with a lot of lamas. For the last 10 years, I was working with the lineage holder for all the indigenous ancient Bon teachings, which go back 18,000 years, with His Holiness the 33rd Menri Treasing. He's been the most profound teacher I've ever had. He's also the senior Dzogchen, Great Completion meditation teacher for the Dalai Lama. So he was the best teacher I ever had. And I started translating some works under him. And one day he sat me down and brought out all the advanced yogi texts and said, these advanced practices, very few people can do them anymore. So they're all going to die out. So I have a favor to ask you. Will you translate these works and then put them in a form of meditations that work for Westerners, so we have them preserved in the West? So, and because if you don't, they're going to die out in the next 10 years because there are very few people who can do them anymore. What am I going to do? Say, no, I don't feel like it? So I said, of course I'll do it. So I took
and
3.5 years off from my clinical teaching and patients, closed my psychology practice as a clinician, and I got a benefactor to match my salary, so I didn't go broke, and spent 3.5 years translating. We have 8 books coming out, and one of the volumes includes all the advanced cave and hermitage yogi text. It's now out. It's called Self-Arising Threefold Embodiment of Enlightenment, and we've taken all.
And what have you found?
Practice or the visions practices,
And
put
then
them in a form that works for Westerners, and we have audio or video recordings of all those teachings.
it's just impressive.
So
what have you
by the
found
time
as
I
a
finish my life, all that stuff will be left behind for generation.
what have you find as a main learnings or main findings while you were translating these books? What got your attention or like just amazed you when you were translating and researching and learning?
Well, the two in the Bon things that were most amazing. Well, some of the things that were pretty amazing to me was learning the inner fire practice with working with the central channel. You develop a sacred landscape of the physical body. It becomes a sacred body, and it's all energy and movement of what are called winds in space through energy channels in the body. And it's a spectacular experience of the human body as all being made of light and color. And it burns off residual conceptualizations so that awakened awareness becomes far more stable. So that was a profound thing. We've now taught it 6 times, and we've worked out the bug teaching it to Westerners, and it works. Then the bypassing visions are 4 levels of visions where you learn to look expanse through the what's called the heart lamp, which is where you open up a continuous flow of awakened mind, and look out through the fluid eye lamps, which are like crystal balls, and you start to seeing energy drops dancing in the field, in the peripheral of the field, and then the filaments, golden filaments, and eventually they change into shapes, and eventually you see the sacred world of the mandala, all the Buddha fields, and you don't see an ordinary world anymore. Everything becomes what we call the Sambhogakaya, the sacred world of the mandala. You only live in the sacred world. It's remarkably spectacular. Then the more you see that sacred world, it breaks your heart that most people have clueless about this, so that plants the seed of aspiration, and at some point that aspiration explodes into millions of aspirations, helping people along the way, and that sets the foundation for enlightenment. So these experiences are measurable in science, and they represent the epitome of the human condition. I think what I've learned the most is that there's so much of the mind that we never develop, and it's sad. You could learn the state and for the rest of your life, and it's teachable, and that makes all the difference in the world, in the quality of life that we live. So,
And then, what's the what would you say? What would you say is the key for getting? I mean, you concentrate on training, concentration training. We live in a society that our current attention span is 6 seconds, and a fish is 9 seconds.
taught with Tibetan
Sorry, what?
15 years, and they don't know how to teach Westerners. I said I taught with Tibetans for about 15 years. They don't know how to teach Westerners. They either talk about doing 100,000 preliminaries, which Westerners don't relish, or they talk about the higher attainments in abstract ways, and they never show the meditations for how to do it. So one time in the mid-'80s, I was visiting the Dalai Lama, and I used to teach with Denma Lotso Rinpoche, who was the abbot of Namgyal Monastery, the Dalai Lama's monastery in Dharamsala. So he had apparently talked to the Dalai Lama about our trying to this great experiment of teaching to Westerners. And the Dalai Lama said to me at that occasion, he said, stick around, there's somebody you're going to meet. He has an unusual style of teaching. And I met this Lama who said, sit down and take a meditation posture. And he walked me through the entire teaching on inner fire practice and central channel practice. And I just followed him and mastered the whole thing in 6 hours. And then he said, don't practice this and don't teach it. And I said, well, why are you showing me this? He says, I'm showing you not about inner fire practice. I'm showing you a style of teaching. It's called pointing out the way. And in the pointing out style of teaching, which represented an old lineage, it's relational based. In the relationship, you give detailed instructions about what's going to happen next and orient the person to what to expect. Then all the meditations are guided. You walk them through it, and then you talk with them immediately when they finish that round to make sure that you go on to the next one and give them detailed instructions for that. And you can walk people through the entire path up to awakening and beyond awakening with this special style of teaching. So that's what I learned that's most unique. It's that style of teaching. It's teaching that works for Westerners, because our great tradition of growth is relationally based, which is psychotherapy in the West. This relational way of teaching, in either in one-on-one or in small groups, a certain style of teaching, and I've been teaching it ever since. And getting a course, we've kept statistics for the last 20 years. About 1 out of 3 people in a week will get a taste of, however unstable that is. That's not bad. And then we offer other advanced courses to stabilize awakening and to develop Sangye, and eventually we'll also on full Buddhahood. So we're trying to introduce the courses as people move along the path that are needed at that level of practice. Finish this life having left behind a complete set of teachings in a way that works for Westerners, and I feel I've done something useful with my life.
And then, why do you think why almost everyone is emotionally broken? What are the most common patterns? How can we work on repairing self-infringed damage?
Well, the damage starts with early attachment in relationship. There's a way of studying that in the laboratory with live observation called the strange situation paradigm. And we take a mother and a child from the ages of 10 months to 24. and there's a unfamiliar playroom with toys on the floor and 2 chairs in the room and no instructions, and you see what the child does with getting interested in the strange environment to getting interested in the toys and playing with the toys. Then after 3 minutes, a stranger comes in and you see whether going back to the play behavior when the stranger is present along with the mother. And after 3 minutes, the mother is asked to leave, and you see what it's like for the child and how it affects the play behavior to be in the room alone with a stranger without the mother. Then the mother comes back, and you see the reunion behavior, and the stranger leaves at that time. And then the second time, the child is left in the room alone for 3 minutes, and you see how that affects the play behavior. And then the mother comes back, and there's a second reunion. You get all the possibilities, and what you find is at a rough 18 to 24 months, 4 patterns emerge. And the reason why they emerge then is attachment behavior, how the child happens in the first minutes of life. But what affects human development is attachment representations, what Bowlby called an internal working model for attachment. We make a represent that develops at 18 months because that's the peak of representational thinking. So we have an internal model or template for how relational behavior is going to be. And there are four possibilities. Securely attached kids have a clear preference for their mother. And as Bowlby said, that the more secure are in the relationship with the mother, the stronger the attachment bond, the more they become independent and they explore more and more complex play behavior. And so what's built into human attachment is the more secure the relationship is, the more independent we become. And the more we develop exploration of the world, and playful exploration of the world is the vehicle of developing a strong sense of self. So kids who grow up to have what we call dismissing attachment, they deactivate the attachment system because they've been rejected too many times for their explicit wish for attachment needs to be met. And they don't have a preference for the mother or the stranger or being alone. They just do the toys, and they get somewhat frustrated and aggressive with the toys. But they disconnect from people. People who have what we grow up to have what we call anxious preoccupied attachment, anxious attachment, they deactivate the exploratory system. They get very clingy with the mother, and they can't explore in this unfamiliar environment. And when the mother leaves, they can't explore at all anymore. They don't do any play behavior. It's quite dramatic. And what causes anxious preoccupation is over-involvement in the mother's state of mind. Some children grow up in a family where the mother worries too much about them, and they're always regulating and soothing the mother's state of mind rather than the mother soothing them. So they end up with 3 things going on. They end up with constant anxious arousal that they can't mitigate. They end up with a weak sense of self because playful exploration is the vehicle of strong self-development. And they end up being chronic caretakers of other people at the expense of their own needs. We call that anxious preoccupation. And then there's a 4th group of what's called disorganized attachment. And they deactivate the attachment system and the exploratory system both. And they often have a lot of dissociative behaviors and symptoms in childhood and adulthood. And what causes disorganized attachment is the source of comfort is also the source of fear or terror. So when a child is emotionally upset, they normally seek the parent, the caregiver out as a source of comfort and soothing, and they get physically comforted and hugged, and they get verbal reassurance. But in this case, the parent is the source of physical or sexual abuse or boundary violations and overstimulation. And the natural impulse to get comforted when they're afraid, they can't go there because they're going to get abused by the parent who's the source of comfort. So it's an impossible dilemma for the child. So they just shut down the whole system. And we know that in many studies that in the modern Western culture, which is Europe and Canada and the United States, that the base rates of secure attachment are about across studies. So that means that 1 out of 3 people have insecure attachment. But in cultures where people go to a very, very low, there's one study that was done in the Soviet Union, and the base rates of secure attachment were 9%, because people in the winter worry about having enough food and they have enough heating, and they're so distressed by the poor living conditions that they don't really have much energy to be good attachment figures for their kids. And one of my former students from China, and I was his mentor at Harvard Medical School for 2 years as a postdoctoral fellowship. He's a psychiatrist, and we trained him in of attachment, and he normed that in China. And he found that there's a blossoming middle class in China where you can have more than one kid, and those kids, most of them have secure attachment at a high level. But in the factories in the small rural area, mothers were working in the factories making tchotchkes for the rest of the world 18 hours a day with cheap labor. All the kids are warehoused, and not even an orphanage. They just get warehoused for. The mother never sees the child for the first 2 or 3 years of life. That screws around with attachment. So the secure attachment figures are less than under, like in the Soviet Union, and that has long-term consequences, because a good deal of that population is going to have disorganized attachment, which means a lot of dissociative behavior. And we know that people with disorganized attachment, as they grow up in adolescence and teens, they're going to have a whole range of mental health problems and many psychiatric conditions. And if they get abused in later childhood, they're going to have what we call complex trauma. They're going to have 8 to 9 diagnoses, including a personality disorder diagnosis and a major dissociative disorder diagnosis and multiple addictions. And they have 8 or 9 diagnoses. They're hard to treat. We found that as we developed the 3 pillars treatment, we can take people with disorganized attachment and develop a new positive, stable, internal working model for attachment within 1 to 3 years, and they get better, and they have the capacity for healthy, secure adult relationships, and they don't have mental health problems anymore. They get better. So I'm happy with this treatment that we spent 20 years developing.
And then what is this
First
treatment about, the 3-pillar treatment? What is about?
The 3 pillars are the most important pillar is what we call ideal parent figures. I say to somebody who has some version of insecure attachment, I say, imagine that you grew up in a family different from your family of origin, with a set of parents ideally suited to you and your nature. And imagine them being with you in a way that you would feel absolutely secure in the attachment relationship. So, and we would change that so that for some people, if the issue was that they didn't feel safe, then these parents, ideal parents, were provided an absolute sense of safety, and they could be sought out as a safe haven. If the issue was the parents were out of it and not attuned to the child's internal state, these are ideal parents who are carefully attuned to everything the child does and everything that the child thinks and feels. If it's the failed soothing, then the parents are comforting and soothing, both with hugs and physical contact and closeness and verbal reassurance. If the issue is the failed self-esteem, the expressive about their total delight in everything that this child does and who this child is. If it's failed self-development, then the parents are absolutely encouraging of bringing out the best and strongest sense of self in the child. And if missing attachment, we want to emphasize parents who are openly encouraging of the child to express their attachment needs, and they fulfill them. If it's an anxious child, then we focus on parents who don't involve the child in their state, but are constantly curious about the child's state of mind. So they give up that out the other and can explore their own mind and develop a strong sense of self. If it's disorganized attachment, and provide a sense of safety, so that by knowing what we know through the research and through in a careful assessment with the adult attachment inventory, we can tailor the treatment specific to that individual. Repeat the imagery in every week, once a week session or once every other week session, tape the sessions and put it on their mobile device and have them practice the sessions once a day. And 2 or 3 years later, they've developed a stable, positive, internal working model for healthy attachment. And they learn to operate out of that model, and their psychiatric conditions stabilize. They develop a level we call coherence of mind. They have a good capacity to reflect on their internal experience, and they have the capacity to select for healthy, secure, intimate relationships. So that's the ideal parent figure protocol. The second thing we included was a range of metacognitive, which means the capacity to reflect on your own state, in a way that has a regulatory effect, to reflect on your own state so you can see when you're disorganized and you can make the correction and get more organized, to take a larger perspective and to learn to operate in a more positive way out of that larger perspective. And so patients develop a new meaning in life, and to introduce a whole range of metacognitive skills that support the work that we're doing with training a new positive model for attachment. And then the third is something I learned from Giovanni Liotti when he was alive in Rome. And he introduced me to the work of Michael Tomasello, the social anthropologist who spent 10 years studying collaborative behavior in chimpanzees and apes, silverbacks. And he found that higher primates are collaborative when they are getting food, but they don't share the food very much. But what's unique in the evolution of humans is that they're highly collaborative around abstract projects. So we can together 9 authors and collaborate for 20 years on this attachment book. That's an example of that. And then after he finished his primate research, he started studying human infant attachment, and he found that secure kids are naturally collaborative. They are the ones that share the toys, and they're sensitive to the kids who have time in preschool. But kids who have insecure attachment, dismissing attachment, anxious, preoccupied attachment, or so when they're in therapy, they can't use the therapy very well because an anxious, preoccupied one will never they'll never let the therapist speak. They talk over you. The dismissings never make eye contact, and they minimize talking about important things like feeling states. And as people get dissociative and they get disorganized, so we can train them to be present. We can train them to talk in a way that makes sense, so they live in an interpersonal world. And if we don't point out that non-collaborative verbal and non-verbal behavior, we're not doing the patients any favor. We more verbally and non-verbally, and these are the 3 pillars that we are introduced so that they learn capacity, secure, deeply rewarding, intimate relationships. And since that significant pathology of mostly disorganized attachment is associated with many types of mental health problems emerging in late adolescence and early adulthood, by making a strong foundation in attachment or treating those who are not, it makes for a better world that way, because people have much more capacity for fulfilling secure relationships. And it diminishes the eventual emergence of psychiatric conditions that we spend a lot of money on in the West.
And then, so what's your story with meditation, and how to do a proper meditation session, and how to go beyond? Any tips or advice?
Well, since learning out the pointing out way, I'm more favorable to that style of teaching, because it's a guided meditation. If you do it on your own, the danger is that you do 2 things. One is you think about what you're doing. In Dzogchen, we call that conceptual meditation. You never move on thought, because you're using thought to frame the meditation, and it may not be the best meditation. So one that we have tried to do in this pointing out way is to do guided meditation. So if people take the 8-day training course, it covers everything from the a taste of awakening. People can follow it up by developing a relationship with one of our pointing out way teachers, and they can follow it up by purchasing audio recordings for the entire course so that they can listen to the audio recording and they don't go off on their own and start creating bad habits of mind. So one of the advantages of guided meditation is it keeps you on track. The other thing that we try and teach is to have metacognitive awareness during meditation. In other words, to reflect on it, to look with awareness, not with awareness, and see what your state of mind is, and to know when the meditation is ideal and you're in a good state, and to know when it's off track and to make the correction when it's off track. We teach them to develop a metacognitive awareness of their own state during meditation. If they don't do that, they're going to develop a lot of bad habits and the meditation is going to bottom out. There's a Sufi tale that says a log sits on a woodpile very quietly for years and years, but logs never realize God. So don't sit like a log, sit intelligently. You have to put your metacognitive awareness online and to reflect on the quality of your meditation so you're constantly correcting it. There was a neurocircuitry study done out of David's lab in Wisconsin where they looked at beginning and advanced concentrators, and both groups activated the ACC, the anterior cingulate cortex, but only the advanced meditators, in addition to that, activated the right dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is the metacognitive awareness center of the brain. What made them advanced meditators had nothing to do with the time that they spent meditating. There were people who had meditated 30 years and they were in the beginning group, and people who meditated less than a year and they were in the advanced group. The difference was not that they could concentrate by activating the ACC and tune out distraction and make the mind stay on the concentration object. In addition to that, they were always monitoring the meditation and self-correcting it, not with thought, but with pure awareness. They were seeing and they were always self-correcting, so the meditation was constantly improving and moving along the path. So this teaching people to have confidence in their metacognitive awareness and exactly how to use it and what to look for at every step of the practice is an important ingredient of meditation. Otherwise, people are just sitting there and they're thinking too much and they're making a lot of bad habits and they don't even know that. The meditation never goes anywhere.
On that, so looking at so we all can be tricked, or we all can be tricked by your own meditation practice if we are not doing guided meditations as you suggest, right? So is anything the Bön philosophy, which is a sacred Tibet philosophy and teaching, is something to do with that? And can you share with us what you have learned and discovered, and why it should matter to the Western?
Well, I'm mostly focusing on, with His Holiness Menri Treasing, the Bön Great Completion, or what's called Dzogchen, and as the name Great Completion and means, it completes the path of full enlightenment to Buddhahood. So these are the more advanced teachings. There are 3 maps. There's the set of teachings that bring you from the beginning of the practice to a taste of awakening. There's a second set of teachings that refine that awakening so you have it more frequently for longer duration and more immediately on the pillow and then off the pillow, so you have it all the time, 24/7, including mixing into deep sleep and dreaming, so you're always in an awakened state. And then there's a third map, that Sangye, the complete eradication of negative states and the flourishing of all positive states, and ends in what we call the threefold embodiment of enlightenment. And His Holiness was generous to me by teaching me all these 3 maps, including emphasizing the teachings on the third map that I had not gotten. He wanted me to have that complete set of teachings and to make them available to the West before he died. He died last year at the age of 90.
So really sorry. I mean, I guess it was a really important mentor and teacher for you, and all this share with you. And yeah, So it's a great responsibility also. And then, what is your biggest challenge right now, and how you are trying to overcome it?
My biggest challenge is that for the last 2 years I have Parkinson's disease. So if we were doing a live interview, I've lost a fair amount of facial expressivity, and it's hard. I have heavy breathing, and an essential tremor. It's perfectly fine, but the body's not so good anymore. So it gets harder. I travel all over the world, so it's a little bit more. I'm trying to leave behind a complete set of what I know while I'm still healthy enough in my form body to do that. And if I have another 2 years, I'll finish up leaving the whole map behind.
We will make sure that here in Spain, and a lot of people that is listening to the podcast will spread your word as much as far as we can, and we will share all your teachings, all your books, all your project, because what you're doing is remarkable. What you're doing is changing just the status quo.
Muchas gracias.
Dan, what's the thing you feel most proud of?
Well, I think it's my kids came out. If you have kids and you don't worry about them, you're doing well in life as a parent. And I'm proud about, those are the things I'm most proud about.
What would you define as the next steps in your projects? What would you like to accomplish this year and
I'm
next
trying
one?
to take all my clinical teaching and put it online and make it available with CEU credits for clinicians.
Yeah.
Trying to take the last of that third map, which is before His Holiness died, he gave me very detailed pith instructions on everything about open up the threefold embodiment of enlightenment. And I've been translating a number of works specifically on that, and I'm trying to make all that stuff available. And the last thing that I learned was a great master, when they die, during the dying process, they can do one of two things. They dissolve, they go into meditation while they're dying and dissolve the physical body into light. So the body disappears within 3 days, and rainbow light floats in the space above where the body was, like the resurrection of Jesus. And there are techniques to accomplish rainbow body. And or another thing is the Lama can die and you cremate the body, and in the ashes of the bones there are things called relics, which are little round pellets about a millimeter in bright colors, and they are said to inspire faith. They have an influence on physical reality, and they have an influence on the mind. So before he died, he gave me the secret texts on rainbow body teachings, and I translated them, and we decided that we would look at this from a scientific point of view. So when he died, he gave me his relics. He also changed into rainbow light.
Wow.
He left behind relics, and I donated them to science, and we're using Bill Tiller's work at Stanford Research Institute about how energy mind pattern is still in, and the relics emit an energy that's a life form of energy, and it has effects on reactive decay rate and enzyme systems being activated. And we've been able to show that this life form of surviving energy from a great master has influence on physical reality. The second step is we're now trying to identify what the relics are made of, whether they're made of some extraordinary, non-ordinary substance in the universe, or whether they're elements that we can identify from the periodic table. So that's another piece of the work we're trying to put out, both from a scientific point of view in terms of the translations.
And then What's your? We are getting almost to the end of the interview. Before entering into our rapid fire questions, I have a last question before going to the rapid fire questions, which is, what's your daily routine? Do you have any super habit or any routine or rituals that you do through the day that you also teach maybe in your courses or you just for you?
At this level of practice, there's no formal meditation practice. There's no distinction between sitting on the pillow and sitting off the pillow. The mind is awake all of the time, mostly in deep sleep and dreaming also, as well as in waking reality. It never stops. Routine with that, although sometimes I'll do routines around some of the advanced practice with the central chant, work on the bypassing visions and sustaining that level of the sacred world always right here. You don't fly off to it somewhere, some remote land. It's always right here. You just got to see it. So now my daily routine is mostly around honestly staying healthy. So I can handle the severe muscle dystonia I get from the Parkinson's by working out on a stationary bike a number of times a day.
Bike, yeah.
I can, so I can do the work that I'm doing.
So I'm gonna go for some rapid fire questions. And what's the book you have read the most?
The book.
I'm sorry. What's the book you? So can you repeat again, please?
The book that I spend the most time translating and spend the most time dwelling upon and learning was the Advanced Teachings of the Cave and Hermitage Yogis. It's published and available through Amazon, and it's called The Self-Arising Threefold Embodiment. That's the work I spend the most time trying to master and understand.
What will be a place to be and stay for you?
A place to be? I didn't hear the other part of the question.
Sorry. What's the place to be and stay? What is your favorite place?
Where I like to travel to?
Yes.
I love going to the outback. It's one of the few wild places in the world. And I love the Aboriginal culture and Dreamtime. When I was at the University of Chicago, my dissertation advisor was the great historian of religion, Professor Mircea Eliade, and he wrote his dissertation on Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, and I read the Yoga Sutras in the commentaries to them in the original Sanskrit with him. But his other field work great work was on shamanism, which is where I got interested in the Bön. And the great shamans he did his field work in Arnhem Land. So I like going to Arnhem Land, which is purely an Aboriginal part of Australia that you have to get a special permit to. It's one of my favorite places.
What's the most powerful skill you have?
Powerful what?
Powerful skill you have.
I think teaching. I grew up in a working class environment, and my parents didn't have money to support me to go to school, so I went to the jobs. Then my ticket to graduate school at an expensive school, the University of Chicago, was a Danforth Fellowship. And they gave 12 fellowships out a year for young, promising teachers. And what they did for the first 4 years at my graduate training is that we had to donate a month during the summer and training us to be promising teachers. So they would bring out the best college teachers in the country in different topics, and they would film the teachers, and they would break down the film much like we do with watching sports films. And they would say, this is how you teach and why. And then we'd get up and have to teach, and they would coach us on the spot live. And then we don't train people to be teachers anymore. So
no, it's really interesting.
Special training. It made.
And then, what would you like to do that you haven't done yet?
I don't have much left over. I'd like to finish up what I said about I need another 2 years to pass on these teachings. But and I'd like to stay around for my wife and kids. But other than that, I don't have anything that's really unfinished. I've seen most places I want to see, and
Brilliant. What's your favorite?
met many wonderful people. So I can't complain. It's been a good life.
What's your favorite quote, or your most special quote?
I don't know if I have a favorite quote.
Or one
I
is
think it would be something around trusting in yourself and your own resources.
Thank you.
And that's the key to doing well in life.
What's the most amazing memory you retain in yourself? What's the thought or the idea or the memory that most impacted you, that you have still on your retain?
I think the first encounters I had with this homeless men retreat, because in the Bön tradition, there's a text, and there are 9 levels of teaching on reading minds, but I never took that seriously. So when I went to see him, I didn't even know who he was. With my son, we delivered 2 tons of clothing to an orphanage in India. Orphanage. Kids were taken away from their parents, and they're in China, and mostly boys were dumped at the Chinese-Indian border. And then we took in 450 kids, and they didn't have enough clothing for the winter. So my youngest son, Gabe, said, I'll collect the clothing. So he tapped all the yoga moms in the suburbs in Boston where we lived, got about 350 down jackets from kids who were outgrown the size of them. And he went to the Gap and got 600 pairs of jeans that they donated. And being a good dad, we lugged all the stuff over to India, and it got hung up in Indian customs. Someone once said that the revenge that the Brits had for India's independence was to leave behind an impossible bureaucracy. So we had this permission to get the clothing through customs, but it was the American Bön Foundation, and they wanted the Indian Bön Foundation. So I had to call the monastery, and they sent down this Lama, Geshe Sonam Gurung, who I've been translating with for the last 12 years. He's a dear friend. He's like my brother. And we waited in clothing, finally free from the customs without paying any bribes on it. And we lugged it off the muddled chaos for about 3 hours. And when the dust settled, everybody had clothing and jackets for the winter. And then Geshe Sonam said, you have to meet the abbot. He's the lineage holder for all these teachings. So I said, okay. So I walked in, and he looks at me and he says, you know awakening. He saw that right away. And I said, if I said yes to that, I wouldn't know very much. And he laughed, and he said, that's a good start. And then I went a year later, and he had come to New York to visit a doctor he had around health issues. And myself and my youngest son, Gabe, who was 16 when he collected the clothing, and was a year later, he had gotten curious about my meditation retreat, and he took the retreat, and he had some struggle with concentration, but he got a taste of awakening. And when he opened up this vast, huge perspective, he shut it down and scared and said, I don't know about this yet. So we walked in to see Menri, and I had been reading a number of Dzogchen books in Tibetan on what's called Trek Show, or thoroughly cutting through the ordinary mind to awaken mind. And we walked in to see him, and he did what he typically did with his mind reading. He said to Gabe, good retreat. He said, it will open up after that, more detail. And he looks at me and he said, why are you reading all these Trek Show books? He knew what I was reading. That's pretty specific in terms of mind reading. Wow. I said, well, different ways of teaching for different people. And at first the mind reading was a bit weird, but after, when I was going to retreat with him, I found it very comforting, because I'd show up in his room and he'd say, now do this. And I didn't have to explain my state. He just would see it. The instructions matched to where I was. So I never had a teacher like that before.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
the one thing I did book on mind reading, he said it would all come back to me at some point in my practice, and I didn't need it. But he gave me everything else, including the Rainbow Body Secret teachings. So I can't complain. He's given me almost everything. He was very generous to me. So I'm trying to honor the teachings now by keeping them precious.
What would you say if you had, what message would you say, or what message would you share if you have the possibility to reach 100 million people?
That awakening the mind is possible, is not even hard to do, and that opens up the heart to make a better future. Otherwise, we're not going to survive as a species. We live in a generation that's way too self, and long-term consequences of the resources on this planet, or even jobs. We need to revision the future in a more compassionate way. Everybody needs to be involved in that. Otherwise, we won't survive as a species. I want to pass the world on to my kids and my kids' kids, and down the generation. As of 2 years ago, the statistics were that 95% of the wealth is owned by 3% of the. That doesn't work anymore. We're evolving a world oligarchy, and we're seeing the long-term consequences of that, which are something that I concern myself with a lot. We have to shape a better world, and we need everybody involved in doing that.
Thank you. Dan, 2 questions to go. What advice would you give to the future Dan in 15 years? And what advice would you give the old Dan 30 years ago?
Well, the old Dan 50 years ago was insecure and somewhat arrogant. And I think that the advice I would give him from the point of being deeply involved in spiritual traditions is that self-importance isn't terribly important.
And which advice give you what advice will give you to the future Dan in 15 years? In 50 years, if you could give him in 50 years advice to yourself from now on.
Take care of your body and stay alive so you can help people.
Dan, is there anything else you want to add?
We all have Buddha nature built in. It's part of the equation. Accessing that and manifesting that brings out the best of human nature. If everybody did that, we'd create a world that's truly loving and sharing and not self-involved and not selfish.
Dan,
it matters if we're going to survive as a species.
This is one of the interviews, one of the most inspiring interviews I've ever done. Your compassion, your emotions, your humanity is thrilling. Thank you so much for what you do. Thank you so much for having this space of time for this interview, and I'm really impacted. I'm really positively impacted by your work and by your presence and by your consciousness and your awakening. And thank you so much for the gift you are giving to humanity, and your work devoted for change and prosperity. Thank you so much, Dan.
My pleasure. Thank you for such thoughtful as an interviewer. It matters.
Dan,
the best of this interview with your questions.
Where people can find you and contact you, and what projects people can join because I'm sure a lot of people will love to be part of your project,
If they want to learn about the performance excellence work, it's on a website called Mind Only. If they want to learn about the Mind Only, and if they want to learn about the meditation retreats, on the Mind Only site, there's a complete course in concentration training. But if they want to learn about the 8-day retreats and the advanced retreats, that's in another website called pointingoutway.org.
Pointing out?
Pointingout.org. All one word.
I don't know the listeners, but I would love to, as I say to joke, I would love to join to the 8-day retreat project. For sure, I want to join. So if I'm lucky enough, soon we will meet in person in your retreats, because I can't wait to be part of one of this.
There's one in London there's one in London in June. It's
really?
Yeah.
Wow. Nice. I'm just writing down. Thank you so much, Dan, and we wish you time, health, and energy, and that's the best we can wish for you, and also being so grateful for the time you are giving to this podcast and to me and every listener who is listening right now.
My pleasure. Thank you. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much.
Disrupt everything. Elígete a ti mismo y sé tu propio turbo.
Thank you for listening to the interview, and apologize for the technical disturbances you can find in the podcast. Mostly on my side. I don't know. I didn't know what happened, but I couldn't properly. It was a little noise that goes and comes. So I hope you can pardon. You can. You can forgive us, or you can forgive me. But the quality on Dan's side is pretty good, pretty decent. So this is why I decided to leave the podcast, and also because I don't know if I will have another chance to interview Dan, and that's what happens when you do interviews on, like remotely, which is not really a good idea, but is what it is. So you have to dance with it, and amor fati, love fate. And this is what happened, and I want to keep it imperfect. I want to keep it as real as possible, organic, and I hope you enjoy it and find it useful, valuable, and life-changing as I did. Thanks for being in Disrupt Everything podcast series. This is Dan Brown, Dr. Daniel Brown. You can find about his projects on Mind Only, also about his courses. And also you can find more about his retreats, and you can contact him and contact his team. And I want to say thank you, like a really serious thank you to Joe Gordon, who made it possible. He's his trustee and the guy who is making things happen behind Daniel Brown. He's his wingman. He's a really tough business developer, but a really amazing human being, absolutely fabulous. So thank you, Jock. Thank you, Dan. And you have been disrupted. If you find it useful, please share it with one person, and also give a review in any platform you are listening. We will be grateful, and it will help us to spread this word, which we keep free of advertising for you to enjoy, and don't have, these harassments or, interruptions. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being you.
Esto ha sido Disrupt Everything by Isra García. Encuentra el riesgo antes de que el riesgo te encuentre a ti.